In this video, I like to summarize the pretzel decision story. And the pretzel decision story started with this video with parts 1 through 3. And somebody was watching part 3, and I had to cut off early because of a time limit and didn't quite get my full conclusion in, full summary. So somebody contacted me and wanted a part 4. So this is the part 4 summary of this story. Now let me quickly recap the first 3 parts and then pick up and wrap this up. As with any decision, we used our neighbors. Our neighbors had some money, and they had to decide. They had a decision to make. And they either wanted to open a pretzel business, yes, or not open the pretzel business with some money that they had. Now, if they didn't open the pretzel business, they would keep it in the bank, or else hopefully they would open it, and it would be successful, be a success. But in order to figure all this out, they needed to do, we advised them a little bit with some good decision-making skills. So they needed, this is their problem, they needed some fundamental objectives. Now, to build those fundamental objectives, they needed some values, which basically, to make it simple, this is not a decision analysis course. So to make it simple, they just wanted to make money, make a profit. That was their goal. That was their objective. Now, the other components that go with this are, they needed some information. And the information they needed, we discussed. Again, I would not watch this until you watch parts 1, 2, and 3. It's probably better to watch all 4 together. So, actually, the person that was watching it was saying it was kind of like watching a movie and then not seeing the ending. So this is the ending. So the info here was we collect a sample, and we collected a sample of 40 in the first part, and we collected a sample. And as you collect a sample, you can do a lot with that. You can test. You can use that to test a claim. You can study the data. But the neighbors had a claim. They actually had and they knew this was a profitable claim because they had a claim of the proportion of people buying pretzels was greater than or equal to 0.4. Now they also did a profit and loss model and found that the threshold, this was like the objective, and they had a threshold where the threshold was, let's kind of do the threshold in red because below that it's not that good. Anything less than 0.32, they lose money. So they have that's called a threshold. Threshold and objective. And where we could study the data. But we went the route of the hypothesis testing because that was able to give us a good decision model. Now, that model was basically used to not only test their claim, but to guide their decision process. Now, let's take a look at this real quick. And again, this is more of a summary slide, so I'm trying to stay away from a lot of details here because we did that in the first few videos. Let's take a look at what happened here. We found out that we accepted that claim in the first video. We did a sample. We got something now. In that first one, the rejection region was anything the rejection region in the first, when we did a sample of 40, it was anything less than 0.33. And we were greater than that, so we accepted. And we also found that we did a full risk study, and we found the risk was medium. Again, quick recap on risk. We found bad things that can happen. That's the events, the likelihood of the bad things happening, and the consequences together. As you recall, we had likelihood here, consequence here, and we had things like in the middle here. Whereas up here was bad risk, up here was low risk. So we were about medium. But the other piece of the decision puzzle that the users, our neighbors, your neighbors actually, had was preferences. Let's do preferences in red, because that's an important piece of a decision. Preferences. Preferences. Now the preferences are used like their risk tolerance for risk, how they feel about losses. You know, as losses get bigger, do they have more weight? It's called the utility for losses, but again, this is not a decision science course. So preferences are things like how they come up with their thresholds, and actually the threshold was more of a driven by the model, but preferences are more driven by how they feel about the outcomes. So right now we're saying that they don't want medium risk, they want low risk, because their risk, they don't tolerate risk well. Your neighbors don't. So we go on, and actually what they did after that was they upped the sample to 400. When they brought it up to 400, what happened? Let's erase everything now so we can start at 400. We're going to keep the word decision. A couple other good words are fundamental objectives and preferences. I'd like to keep that up there. Again, this is the whole goal. This is the value of this, the application of probability and statistics to the real world. So now they decided to up their sample. They wanted to reduce their risk. They don't like medium risk. So they upped it to 400. And what happened was their null hypothesis is still null hypothesis. Let's do that in blue. The null hypothesis is still p greater or equal to 0.4. Long story short, that's 0.4. By the way, that cutoff there is 0.37. They sample. In the other videos, we got 35, but there was a mistake. The neighbors forgot to count some things, and it came out to be 0.36 instead of 34. 0.34. So we still reject. And this is where we were saying before in the other videos, whoa, wait a minute, we're going to reject. We could stop right now and just leave the money in the bank. Or we could continue here. Now, I think it's wise to continue. And we had that discussion in part 3. And the next part of the decision model here is to update your hypothesis. They now reject that hypothesis. We know it's not greater than or equal to 0.4. How about if we make it, and again, this is sensitive, we were saying this about large samples. How about if it's greater than equal to 0.39? Well, when we make it 0.39, again, you can do the math. That was more for parts 1, 2, and 3. But if you do the math, you can see that at 0.39, this rejection region here is at 0.359. So now we accept. Not only do we accept, but let's look at what happens to our, when it's 0.32, when it's 0.32, now we look at this type 2 error here, which is really our type 2 error, beta, likelihood of something bad happening. That's where the threshold starts at. That's what we determined, 32 or lower. So at 32, and by the way, that area when you do the math is 0.0475, pretty small, 0.0475. Consequence is that's probably your best scenario for consequence, so that's a 1. As we go down here, this number gets smaller and smaller, almost like to 0. So your consequence of 5 is never going to happen. So if you recall, I'll do a quick risk rating chart. You remember this from the other videos, videos 2 and 3. This is likelihood, this is consequence. We're way down here. Low likelihoods and all the consequences are low. That, by the way, translates using the preferences of the decision maker to determine this structure of risk rating. That's low risk. That's definitely low risk. Low risk. So now we got low risk. That's acceptable for the decision maker. They do the risk reward trade-off, risk versus reward. Risk is low. The rewards, you know it's going to be at least 0.39. To put that in a profit and loss model, they get some profits. Could be even greater than that. Could be even greater. So looks like a go for them. So it looks like they're going to do that in black. They're not going to go keep it in the bank. They're going to open. And that could go on to be a very well-known business and a very successful business. Keep in mind, that would have stopped right here, right at that rejection. You rejected right there. And some decision makers would have said, oh, I reject, I'm done. That's why we pushed on, and that's the ending of this story. So hopefully this adds some insight for you all, and I'll see you in my next video.